I was halfway through a cold beer on my back porch when I got the call. My Uncle Jasper had passed. I hadn't seen him in years and we weren't exactly close, but apparently he'd left me something. The lawyer's voice crackled through the phone. "Mr. Xavier Maddox, your uncle left you 500 acres of land just outside of Fairgrove." "Wait, 500 acres?" "Yes, sir, unencumbered, free and clear." I nearly dropped the bottle. I'd been living in a 2-bedroom rental for the past 5 years, trying to keep my mechanic business afloat. 500 acres sounded like winning the lottery. Until I drove out there 2 days later and realized something was way off. The GPS dropped me at a pristine metal gate with a fake stone wall and a big brass sign, Crescent Ridge Community HOA managed. Beyond that, rows of luxury homes, pristine sidewalks, and a community park with a duck pond. I blinked at the clipboard in my hand, then at the gate camera blinking red at me. "Can I help you?" A clipped voice came from the speaker. "Yeah, I think I'm standing on my land." There was a pause, then the voice returned sharper. "This is private property, sir. If you don't leave, I'll call security. Go ahead. Maybe they can explain why there's a whole dang subdivision built on land I just inherited." That got the gate buzzing open real fast. I parked my beat-up truck and hadn't even stepped out before she was marching across the lawn in a pastel tracksuit, sunglasses high on her head like a crown. Shoulder-length blonde helmet hair, a clipboard clutched like it was a weapon. Yep, definitely a Karen. "Excuse me," she snapped. "This area is for residents only." "I'm Xavier Maddox. I just inherited this land from Jasper Maddox. You may have heard of him." Her mouth twitched. She hesitated for a second too long. "I'm Deborah Van Holt. I'm president of the HOA here. And I find it highly unlikely that you own anything in Crescent Ridge." I pulled out the deed copy I'd printed from the county records and held it up. Her eyes scanned it, and her face went pale. "Look, there's obviously a mistake," she said quickly, adjusting her sunglasses. "This subdivision's been here for over 8 years. We've invested heavily in it: roads, utilities, landscaping. I think you're confused." "I'm not confused," I said, stepping closer. "You're all living on my land and you didn't even know it," she huffed. "We'll have our lawyer reach out. In the meantime, I'd ask you to leave. You're upsetting the community." I glanced around. A few homeowners had stepped out onto their porches, curious. One guy in a suit was whispering into his phone. "I'll leave when I'm ready," I said, then turned and walked into the middle of the street. I stood there, breathing in, letting it sink in. They built their whole HOA kingdom on my land, without even owning it, and now they were going to pay rent. The county clerk's office was quieter than I'd expected for a Monday morning. A dusty ceiling fan rattled overhead, and a woman behind the counter was tapping her keyboard with one finger at a time. I leaned against the counter, waiting while she pulled up the parcel history. "Here it is," she said, turning a screen toward me. "Parcel 82B, the entire subdivision sits on it. According to our records, it was never sold, just sat under ownership of Jasper Maddox until his death. Taxes were paid every year, too." "By who?" I asked. She clicked again. "Looks like direct payments from a trust account set up 15 years ago. Nothing changed until last month when your name was added." "So you're telling me the HOA built an entire community without buying the land?" She squinted at the screen. "Looks that way. No record of a sale, no lease agreement. Not even an easement filing." I let out a low whistle and stepped back. "Mind printing all of that for me?" She nodded. "Sure thing, but if I were you, I'd get a property attorney. This is going to get messy." I already knew it. That afternoon, I walked into the office of Carla Domings, a real estate attorney I'd worked with once years ago when a client tried to stiff me over a classic car rebuild. She had a personality like a wrecking ball and a memory like a steel trap. "Xavier Maddox," she said, waving me in without looking up. "Last I heard you were chasing down a guy who welded his ignition coil backwards." "Still the same guy," I said, taking a seat. "But now I own 500 acres under a luxury subdivision and the HOA's acting like I'm trespassing." That got her attention. She set down her pen. Sit down and explain, slowly. By the time I finished laying out the documents, maps, and tax records, she was already pulling up case law. Holy hell, she muttered. They built on top of your land without a title transfer. That's not just negligence, that's fraud. Permits, zoning, everything would have required proof of ownership. I raised an eyebrow. So what does that mean for me? It means you've got them by the throat, she said. Unless they can produce a valid deed, they've got no legal claim, and based on these records, they've been collecting HOA dues from people living on stolen property. I leaned back in the chair, arms folded. So what happens next? She tapped her desk. First, we file a quiet title action that officially confirms you as the sole owner. Once that's done, you can either evict them or negotiate leases, but you're going to need to prepare for a fight. These people have lawyers and they're going to scramble to protect their investments. I don't want to displace families, but I'm not letting them get away with this either, Carla nodded. Good, because you're in the right, and if what you're saying is true. Someone inside the county permitting office must have helped them cover this up. That thought hadn't crossed my mind, but it made too much sense. You don't build a gated community without someone signing off. 2 days later, I returned to Crescent Ridge not through the front gate this time, but by walking the tree line behind the golf course. I wanted to get a feel for the land, see how many homes had been built and where the boundaries really were. What I found stopped me cold. At the southern edge, just past a row of pristine cul-de-sac homes, was a fenced-off lot with a generator shed, some security cameras, and a locked utility box. But the fence wasn't part of the original subdivision. It was newer, fresh concrete post bases, no weathering on the metal panels. And there was a sign, private property, HOA maintenance access only. I snapped photos, checked the plotted parcel map I'd gotten from Carla, and felt my stomach twist. That fenced lot was outside the subdivision's approved development zone, which meant they were storing infrastructure and possibly utilities on land they never even tried to hide from. The next morning, Carla filed the quiet title action. We submitted everything: deeds, tax receipts, aerial maps, and county parcel overlays. She also submitted a formal request for the HOA's building permits, utility approvals, and any zoning variances they'd been granted since the first home went up. By Friday, the HOA had their lawyer send me a cease and desist letter claiming I was harassing residents and trespassing. Carla read it once and laughed. They're bluffing. They're trying to scare you off before the county starts digging, and dig they did. A week later, a plainclothes investigator from the district attorney's office showed up at Carla's office. He introduced himself as Damon Cho and carried a stack of files. I've been assigned to look into possible permit fraud tied to Crescent Ridge, he said. Several documents submitted by the HOA reference a land purchase that never occurred. It's looking like someone forged a deed to get the initial building permits approved. Carla leaned forward. Do you have names? Not yet, he replied. But the forgery was notarized by someone who no longer works in the county clerk's office. And the notary stamp used was retired 5 years before the document's date. I sat quietly, processing that. It wasn't just negligence, it was a coordinated cover-up. Damon continued. We also found that the HOA applied for federal infrastructure grants using the forged deed as proof of ownership. That's wire fraud. If this holds, we're looking at federal charges. Carla nodded slowly. What do you need from us? Anything that shows the HOA knowingly operated on land they didn't own. Emails, letters, meeting minutes, even witness statements from residents who were told the property was legally theirs. I stood up. I can get you a few of those. Some of them looked real uneasy when I showed up. That weekend, I hosted a barbecue, not some covert meeting, an honest-to-God cookout. I sent flyers to every home in the subdivision, inviting them to meet the landowner and hear the truth. Most ignored it, but around 20 people showed up, some out of curiosity, others out of concern. A man named Anthony, a retired firefighter, approached me by the grill. "I always thought it was weird how fast they built this place," he said. "No one ever talked about buying the land, just that it was part of a legacy development. Did you ever see a deed when you bought your lot?" He shook his head. "We were told everything was handled by the HOA's developer. We just signed mortgage papers and moved in." I glanced toward Carla, who was chatting with a young couple near the cooler. "Would you be willing to talk to the investigator?" Anthony sighed. "If I'm living on stolen land, I want it made right." "Yeah." "I'll talk." By the end of the day, we had 6 willing witnesses and a growing stack of evidence. Carla compiled it all and sent it off. The next week, the bomb dropped. The district attorney filed charges against 2 former county employees, one for forgery, the other for bribery. The developer who built Crescent Ridge was indicted for wire fraud and conspiracy. And the HOA president, Deborah Van Holt, was subpoenaed for knowingly submitting false documents. Crescent Ridge went into panic mode. Residents started demanding answers. Emergency HOA meetings were called. A few houses went up for sale overnight. But the best part, the court ruled in our favor on the quiet title action. I was now the legally recognized owner of the entire 500 acres, including every square foot beneath their driveways. Carla called me the next morning. "You've got options now. We can pursue back rent, negotiate new leases, or start eviction proceedings for the common areas and structures." I rubbed my chin, thinking, "Let's make them pay, not just money, accountability." She grinned. "Then we start with the clubhouse." That afternoon, we served a formal notice. The HOA clubhouse, pool, and tennis courts were on land not covered by the fraudulent permit. They had 30 days to either purchase a lease or vacate. The clubhouse was their pride and joy. Weekly wine tastings, holiday brunches, HOA elections, it was the crown jewel of their little empire. And now, it was mine. The eviction notice on the clubhouse set off a chain reaction I'd been expecting, but not quite at that speed. Within 48 hours, I was served with a countersuit Crescent Ridge HOA accusing me of unlawful interference with community assets, claiming the land beneath the clubhouse had been gifted in perpetuity to the residents. Carla laughed so hard when she read it, she nearly knocked over her coffee. "There's no record of any such gift," she said, flipping through the filing. "They're trying to invent a legal fiction to stall us, but here's the kicker: look at who filed this. Not their usual firm." I leaned over the table. It was a small practice out of town, the kind that specialized in damage control for failing developers and political fixers. The kind of lawyers you called when you couldn't afford the truth to come out. "They're panicking." "They should be," Carla replied, "because we just got a court order granting us access to the HOA's financials for the last 10 years. And if they've been collecting dues and spending them on land they never owned, that's misappropriation of funds, possibly embezzlement." I drove out to the property again, not through the back this time, but right through the main gate. No one tried to stop me. In fact, the gate was left open, unmanned. I passed a few residents walking dogs or pushing strollers. Most avoided eye contact. A few nodded quietly. When I pulled up to the clubhouse, the front doors were locked. But tucked behind a flower pot near the ramp was a spare key on a blue lanyard. I let myself in and was hit with the scent of lemon polish and chlorine. The place was spotless, too spotless. I started with the filing cabinets in the office. Everything was alphabetized, labeled, and color-coded. But the moment I opened the drawer marked vendor contracts, I knew something was wrong. The folders were pristine, but the documents inside. Dozens had the same signature, same date, all in the exact same handwriting. Carla had warned me to look for that. I took photos of every page, especially the ones with inflated landscaping charges, some claiming up to $15,000 a month for decorative mulch layering and seasonal fountain calibration. Then I moved to the locked cabinet behind the desk. It was cheap metal and the key from the flower pot worked just fine. Inside I found 3 manila folders, one marked Millstone Dev, another labeled Permit Adjustments, and a third simply titled DV. I opened that last one first, bank statements, personal, all belonged to Deborah Van Holt. I flipped through them, my pulse climbing. Transfers from the HOA's account into her own small at first, maybe 200 here, 500 there, but over time they ballooned. One deposit showed $22,000 labeled Special Assessment Overflow. She'd been skimming dues under the table and pocketing them. I took everything and drove straight to Carla's office. She scanned the bank records, her face hardening with each page. "She's cooked," she said. "These are unauthorized transfers. If we cross-reference these dates with HOA meeting minutes and budget approvals, we'll prove she siphoned community money into her own accounts." But that wasn't all. The Millstone Dev folder contained communications between Deborah and a man named Roger Klein, former project manager for the original Subdivision developer. Most of the emails were encrypted printouts, but some were clearly desperate talk of keeping things buried, ensuring the old permit files stay sealed, and one that simply read, "If the county audits us, we're finished." Carla's eyes narrowed. "We need to bring this to Damon." That afternoon, we met with Investigator Cho at the district attorney's satellite office. He took the folders carefully, one by one, flipping through with a practiced eye. "This confirms what we suspected," he said. She was embezzling, falsifying documents, and collaborating with the developer to cover up the fraudulent land deal. But here's what's new: those encrypted printouts. That might be evidence of racketeering. I blinked. "You mean RICO?" "Yes," he said. "If we can prove she used her position in the HOA to commit coordinated financial crimes with others, including the developer, then it falls under federal jurisdiction. Mail fraud, wire fraud, bank fraud, it builds the case." He stood up and left the room briefly. When he returned, there was a second man with him. Tall, square-jawed, and wearing a Department of Justice badge clipped to his belt. "This is Special Agent Marston," Cho said. "He's taking over the federal side." Marston nodded at me. "We'll need a full list of everyone who had financial access inside the HOA over the last decade. Also, anyone who signed off on those utility expansions." Carla handed him a flash drive. "Already sorted." The next day, federal subpoenas hit Crescent Ridge like a thunderclap. The HOA board was suspended pending investigation, the clubhouse was sealed, and residents were notified that all dues would be frozen until further notice. News vans started showing up at the gate. Reporters buzzed through the streets like flies on a carcass. I stayed out of sight that week. Let the storm settle. Carla handled most of the statements. She knew how to keep the message tight. The land was mine, and I was offering residents a fair path forward: rent the lots under their homes at modest rates or negotiate buyouts for long-term ownership. But only after the dust settled. The board's vice president, a man named Greg Penner, contacted Carla asking for a meeting. He claimed he'd had no idea about the forged permits or Deborah's schemes. Carla agreed, but only if I was present, and the meeting was recorded. We met at a neutral location, a law office downtown. Greg arrived looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His collar was wrinkled, and his hands shook slightly as he poured himself a glass of water. "I just want to talk," he said, voice hoarse. "I joined the board 3 years ago. I had no idea the land wasn't legally acquired." "Deborah handled all the early paperwork, I swear." Carla leaned forward. "Then why did you approve a motion to increase HOA dues last year to cover legacy land taxes?" Greg flinched. "She said we owed back payments to the county. I didn't check. I should have." I watched him carefully. "You're telling us you signed off on fake tax payments without verifying anything?" He looked at the table. "Yes." Carla clicked her pen once. "You're likely facing state-level charges. But if you're willing to testify and we can prove you weren't part of the original fraud, you might get immunity." He nodded slowly. "I'll cooperate." 2 weeks later, Deborah Van Holt was arrested outside her gym, cuffed in broad daylight, wearing designer sunglasses and a tennis skirt. Residents stood on their porches and filmed it. Some cheered. Others just watched in stunned silence. Charged with embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering, she was denied bail. The developer, Roger Klein, fled the state but was picked up in Nevada trying to board a private plane. Federal charges followed swiftly. Meanwhile, the residents of Crescent Ridge began to shift. A few moved out, but most stayed. They came to the town hall meetings Carla and I hosted, where we laid out new lease options and offered transparency they'd never known under the HOA. At one meeting, a woman named Denise, an elementary school teacher, stood up. "I paid into this community for 6 years," she said. "I didn't know any of this, but now that we do, I think we should start fresh. No HOA, just a neighborhood." The room murmured in agreement. Carla stepped to the mic. "Under state law, if 75% of homeowners vote to dissolve the HOA, it can be done. And since the HOA never had legal claim to the land, you're in a better position than most to make it happen." By the end of the month, they had the votes. Crescent Ridge HOA was dissolved. I established a land trust, managed through Carla's office, that allowed residents to lease their lots at a nominal fee while maintaining full rights to their homes. The money collected would go towards shared infrastructure, roads, water lines, and maintenance managed by a transparent community board, elected annually. No more secret meetings. No more unapproved assessments. No more Deborahs. As for me, I kept about 50 acres untouched near the North Ridge. Built a modest house with a big porch, a workshop, and enough space to finally open the custom auto garage I'd dreamed of for years. Word got around fast, and soon I had more business than I could handle. One crisp morning, I heard gravel crunch in my driveway and stepped out to find Anthony, the retired firefighter, getting out of his truck with a box under his arm. "Got something for you," he said, handing me the box. "From the residents, just a thank you." Inside was a plaque hand-carved. Xavier Maddox, the man who stood his ground. Didn't need anything flashy. That was enough. Rain tapped lightly on the tin roof of my new workshop as I sanded the edge of a custom hood panel. The scent of lacquer and steel hung in the air, but I wasn't focused on the car. My eyes kept drifting to the county assessor's envelope on the workbench. Inside was the final land valuation. My 500 acres had nearly tripled in value since the HOA scandal broke. The land trust was working. Residents were settling into the new system. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still brewing under the surface. That feeling found confirmation 2 days later when Carla called before sunrise. Her voice was sharper than usual, clipped and low. "Xavier, we've got a problem." "A big one." I grabbed a towel, wiped the grease from my hands, and leaned against the workbench. "What now?" The forensic audit turned up a buried expense trail. Crescent Ridge HOA was funneling money into a shell company, one that doesn't exist in any state registry. I felt my jaw tighten. "How much?" "Close to $500,000 over 7 years. They labeled the payments as contracted utility services, but there's no matching service provider, no tax ID, no contracts, just wire transfers to an offshore intermediary in the Caymans." I didn't say anything for a moment. "We're past mismanagement," she continued. "This is laundering." I dropped the hood panel onto the bench. "You alert Cho." "Already did. He's bringing in a financial crimes unit." The Dodge is expanding the case. By noon, federal agents were back on site, this time examining the HOA's former files with forensic software. Carla and I met them at a secure unit the county had set up to preserve evidence. Agent Marston was there, sleeves rolled up, a stack of freshly printed statements in hand. "Looks like Deborah and her developer friend weren't just skimming dues," he said. "They were using Crescent Ridge to wash dirty money from other real estate deals. At least 3 other subdivisions in the state have similar patterns." Carla folded her arms. "So this wasn't a one-time fraud, it's a network." "Exactly," he said, "and it gets worse. One of the email chains we decrypted mentions a payoff to a zoning inspector. The guy who signed off on the original Crescent Ridge site plan." I narrowed my eyes. "That inspector still working?" No, Marston said. He retired last year. But he took a job consulting for a private developer, one whose name keeps showing up in these shell accounts. That night, I drove out to the southern boundary of the land, beyond the last row of homes. A black SUV was parked just off the access road, engine idling. When I approached, the driver rolled down the window. It was Anthony. Had a guy come by my place this morning, he said. Didn't say much. Just asked if I'd consider selling my lot back to the HOA, told him the HOA doesn't exist anymore. I frowned. What'd he look like? Mid-50s. Armani suit, didn't get a name, left a card with no number. He handed it to me. It was white, unmarked on one side. The back had a single word embossed in silver. Millstone. I turned it over a few times. They're testing the waters. Seeing who they can intimidate or buy out before the feds close in. Anthony nodded. They picked the wrong neighborhood. The next morning, Carla and I filed an emergency petition with the county to suspend all land development permits tied to Millstone Development Group. We attached the offshore wire data, the shell company registration trail, and copies of the decrypted emails. Within 48 hours, the county commission froze Millstone's applications and issued a formal inquiry into their project history. That's when the threats started. Carla's office was broken into. Nothing stolen, just overturned furniture and a shattered window. Someone poured bleach on her files. My mailbox was ripped open and stuffed with shredded photos of my workshop. One resident found her tires slashed and a note pinned under the wiper. Stay quiet. We reported everything. Marston assigned a protection detail to Carla and had my property fitted with motion-activated trail cameras. I wasn't the kind to rattle easy, but I started sleeping with the porch lights on and a shotgun closer than usual. A week later, the break happened. Cho called just after lunch. We got him. Who? Roger Klein flipped. He cut a deal. He's naming every involved party, county officials, developers, even a city councilman who shepherded zoning changes in exchange for kickbacks. I leaned against the porch column. What's he getting? Reduced sentence, witness protection. He's scared out of his mind. Said he was told if he ever talked, they'd bury him in a foundation pour. I didn't respond right away. Cho continued. His testimony's enough to file a RICO indictment. Millstone's CEO, 2 former county employees, and a dozen contractors. We're bringing the hammer down. The first arrests came 3 days later. A dawn raid on Millstone's headquarters made the evening news executives led away in handcuffs, laptops seized, offices taped off. The photos went viral. Residents of Crescent Ridge, once wary of me, now sent sandwiches and thank you cards to Carla's office. One woman dropped off a hand-knitted quilt with the words "Truth Prevails" stitched across it. But there was one last loose thread. The utility lot at the southern edge, the one with the generator shed and security cameras. Carla had been pushing to get access for months, but the county utility board kept stonewalling, citing safety protocols and restricted infrastructure. After the indictments, those barriers vanished. When we finally got inside, escorted by federal agents, we found more than just backup generators. Behind a false wall in the shed was a narrow stairwell leading to a concrete room. Inside were rows of filing cabinets and several hard drives, all connected to a dormant local server. Marston's tech team pulled the contents within hours. The server held encrypted records, land surveys, alternate permit drafts, and a cache of internal memos from Millstone's founders. The documents detailed how they had intentionally built Crescent Ridge on my uncle's land because it wasn't under active development. They expected Jasper to pass away without heirs and planned to claim adverse possession within 10 years, but they never counted on me. The final memo was dated just 2 months before Deborah's arrest. It read, "If the Maddox heir won't sell, pressure him. If he resists, bury him in litigation until he folds." We've done it before. That was their blueprint: build fast, forge documents, and silence opposition through legal attrition or intimidation. They didn't just steal land. They built an empire on threats, lies, and backroom deals. The Dodge RICO case expanded to include 5 additional subdivisions and a total of 39 defendants. The trials would take years, but the core of the operation had been dismantled. Back in Crescent Ridge, things had changed. The old HOA board was gone. The clubhouse had been renovated into a true community center open to all. No dues required. Residents volunteered to clean the park, maintain the trails, and manage the shared infrastructure fund through a rotating committee. No more secret fees. No more fines for mailbox paint. Just neighbors looking out for each other. At the first spring festival held on the old golf course, I walked the grounds with Carla, watching kids dart between food trucks and balloon artists. One of the teens had set up a makeshift stage where a local band played classic rock. "You ever think it'd end like this?" Carla asked, sipping lemonade. "Not once," I said. "I expected lawsuits and headaches. I didn't expect community." She glanced around. "You gave them back more than land. You gave them a way forward." I shook my head. "They built it themselves." I just gave them the space. Later that night, I stood at the edge of the ridge, overlooking the houses below. Porch lights twinkled, laughter drifted up on the wind, and for the first time since I inherited this place, the land felt settled, quiet, right. They tried to steal it, bury it in lies, and build their empire on its back. Now, they were paying rent and a whole lot more.